Hello and welcome to Attacking Third. We are live on YouTube. So, welcome to everyone joining us in the chat. We love to see you. It's been a while. Just kidding. We literally just saw you yesterday. So, welcome back. We've got another team preview episode for everyone. So, make sure you subscribe to us, like this video, and drop your thoughts on the Spirit and the San Diego Wave in the chat. We want to hear all those takes. And we also want to remind everyone this morning, as of 10:30 ET on March 16th, you still have time to get your brackets in. That's right, March Madness starts today. Get your brackets in right now. You can do that on the CBS Sports app and CBSSports.com. Compete in Attacking Third's women's bracket. You can win some cool stuff. We've got some pretty cool prizes lined up. I think there's a Final Four trip, there's an SUV involved. Sign up when you get the chance, and let's go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Attacking Third. I'm Sandra Herrera, lead NWSL writer for CBS Sports. Joined today, as always, by my colleague and co-host Lisa Roman, broadcaster and analyst for CBS Sports. On today's segment, we're going to chat all about San Diego Wave. We are doing a team preview, continuing our team by team previews. These are the last of them, though. So thanks everybody for joining us. And before we take a deep dive into the Wave, make sure that you go ahead and leave us a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. We're also on YouTube, so subscribe to us right here at youtube.com/attacking third. Make sure you get all your exclusive NWSL content, previews, recaps with a 3. The regular season is 1 week closer. It's going to kick off on March 25th, and you can watch all the games on Paramount Plus. And we are doing a team preview for every single team in the Leave a Podcast episode and on YouTube. Check them out. Leave us a review. We want to hear your comments as always. Lisa, I want to hear your thoughts, your opinions as always. We've got 2 more teams to talk about before this season kicks off.
I've got opinions and I've got thoughts. I'm excited about this. A lot of people in our comments have been picking apart our alphabetical order, saying that OL Rain was an O, not an R. So I'm just putting that out there. Guys, we're here. We're doing them all. We're on S and W, San Diego, and then we get Washington Spirit. We're doing them all. Don't worry. We're gonna hit your team. We're gonna give you hot takes on your team, your club that you cheer for. We're gonna talk about the rosters. We will talk about every team. Everyone's like freaking out in the comments. We'll get there. We'll get there. We still have 9 days until the season starts. We'll get them.
Cheers to OL, I guess.
Yeah, like, come on, guys, it's the rain. But yes, I'm excited to talk about the Wave because this is a team that I was very high on last year. I loved watching this team. I have similar sentiments this year about this squad and what they can do. There's just something about Casey Stoney that I enjoy the way that she coaches this team and the way that they can kind of get things done. Right there at Snapdragon Stadium this year, there's a lot of good moving parts all around it. What about you, bud? How's it going? I mean, back-to-back live days, you and me. It's fun to hang out with you.
I stay live. You stay live. We stay live. The thing about A3 is that we're always live. And look, getting another opportunity to hang out with you, chat all things NWSL, hang out with all the awesome A3 listeners is always a great way to kind of kick off my day. So no complaints over here. It's a beautiful sunny day in Chicago, although I don't have a lot of windows around me right now to show that off. But listen, a sunny day in March in high 40s is real like summertime, or excuse me, springtime kind of energy in the Midwest here. So I'm all for it. So I'm glad the sun's out because we're starting this first segment talking about San Diego, talking about the Wave. Let's start with a little bit of an overview of this team and their off-season. Head coach Casey Stoney, second year with the team. And we're going to have to take a look at the 2022 Coach of the Year and sort of see, what's in front of her and her staff and how they navigated this off season, because they have a pretty impressive 2022 to look back on. Their inaugural season in the NWSL, a number 3 finish, 10-6-6 for their overall record. Hosted a playoff game, made it all the way to the semifinals. They defeated Chicago 2-1 in their quarterfinal game, but ended up falling to Portland Thorns 2-1 in their semifinal. Made some moves through free agency this
Mhm.
offseason, navigated the draft pretty well, I think. And, when you and I were chatting a little bit about the offseason, specifically talking about grades, we went with a B for them in this one. So we said good, solid B. Maybe they didn't need, this was a team that maybe didn't need to do too much tinkering, but there were some positional areas that they needed to sort of target and tackle. And we kind of felt that they went out and took care of those areas as best that they could have done. So we went with just a sort of a solid B for them overall. But in terms of those moves to try to bulk up a team and really make an even further push in the postseason, they had some pretty significant signings, right? There are certain teams that rang that free agency bell a little bit louder than some others. And I think you and I both agree that San Diego Wave was one of those teams.
Yes, San Diego had, I mean, an okay offseason, a B, right? Especially when we have to take into consideration how they finished last year, and then what those moves indicated in the offseason. And as an expansion side that earned a playoff hosting a playoff game in their first ever playoffs is pretty impressive. I'm gonna say coming into the season, so I don't think that this team needed to really change too many things. It's not like they needed an entire shakeup. They needed it just to get a little bit more depth. And they only did that like a little bit, because with the changes that they made in the offseason, I think free agency wise, they did really well in what they could do. I mean, some of the free agency comes down to location. And I'm just gonna say it. Who doesn't want to be in sunny San Diego? Who doesn't want to be there in Southern California? So I think that that's a little bit helpful. But they got free agent Danielle Colaprico out of Chicago. That was one of the top prospects in the free agency list. They also got Maggie Doherty Howard. Maggie out of Orlando, a veteran in this league, midfielder, is perhaps adding a bit more depth to that midfield role and that spot for San Diego and Casey Stoney. But I think that those two signings, pretty good for the San Diego squad that didn't really need to shake up too much, because they didn't lose too many players in their offseason. They really didn't. They're returning most of the same squad that they had last year. But then during the draft, right, they also got a Sierra Enge, a 13th overall pick. She was the first pick for San Diego that they had, and it came in the first pick in the second round. And she's already signed a contract. And then they get a goalkeeper out of UCLA, a local product, in Laro Brzicki, right, Sandra? We're working on the pronunciation.
Brixie.
Brixie. Sorry about that. Lauren Brixie. So they're adding a lot of depth in that goalkeeper position, which is where they need some depth, right? Like they've got Caitlin Sheridan, who's Canadian international gold medal winner, but it's an international World Cup year, so you're going to need a little bit of depth at that goalkeeper position. But they didn't lose too many players in the offseason.
No, I'm with you. Look, I want to just remind everybody that, of course, you can find all of our episodes on YouTube. If you follow on your favorite podcast streaming service, look it up. We did all
Mhm.
season grades. We chatted about this. This isn't, I'm having a little bit of deja vu because I'm just like nodding my head and I'm like, yes, I'm in agreement with everything that you said, because I feel like we chatted about it before. But those areas specific, like these players that we're mentioning specifically, whether it's like Daniel Colaprico through free agency, or even these draft picks, right? Like Sierra Enge, number 13 overall for them, or Lauren Brixie. Like these are areas where like these are areas that
Mhm.
this team is going to need to try to target if they want to build on or have an even more successful 2023. And it's important to note that within a World Cup year, those holes might feel a little bigger in light of certain players who may be absent, right? But it's not just Colaprico. They went out and they really were trying to target some midfield depth. So Maggie Doherty Howard was someone
Mhm.
that they went out and targeted. They also signed Rachel Hill as well. And they targeted players that have experience in very specific areas, but like I
Yes.
think somebody like Rachel Hill, I think has sort of shown over the last few seasons in NWSL that she's a bit more versatile. I think that people might have sort of perceived her as previously, like primarily like kind of labeled her as just like a forward. I believe when she was with Orlando was just sort of in the attack as an option for
Mhm.
them. But that's not necessarily the case anymore. Has put in a lot of shifts as kind of like a wing back. And for I think a coach like Stoney who wants to have versatile tactics, really, I think that's the kind of player that she was also trying to target in this offseason as well. So I think when you're looking at the additions that they made, whether it was through the draft or free agency, and you look at and you compare that to the losses, which were not too big, like, there weren't
No.
huge, significant, like, detrimental kind of losses. That's not necessarily the case. I mean, we just saw the recent announcement of Carly Telford. She just recently announced her retirement. So, right there, it already looks like the addition of goalkeeper depth, it was a good and smart move. And Katie Johnson was one of those players that ultimately exercised her free agency, and now that player is with Angel City, right? But I just thought it was so interesting to hear you chat a little bit about like free agency as a whole for these teams because we're looking at kind of maybe two California teams side by
Yeah.
side. And you're just like the pitch is natural. Like all these teams are going to want to go there. And I think we were looking for a little bit of continuity in that with this next offseason because we saw during that expansion year how many players wanted to get out to California and have those negotiations, mutual conversations about moving a player to a California team. But we've got an Angel City that we didn't exactly give a high mark in free agency because they
No.
might have took some big swings, but they kind of missed out and didn't land too many. They did get Katie Johnson, but you're talking about towards the end of a preseason and towards the end of a free agency where that list is much narrow. But then you've got San Diego Wave, who really made that splash
Yeah.
early on with the announcement of Colaprico and then Hill and so on and so forth. So I think that's why we're kind of rolling with the offseason grade of a B with them. I think they navigated it well. They didn't go too crazy, and I think they made a lot more smart moves. But
Yeah, I
um,
I mean, I agree. I think that and we'll get into the roster for the
yeah,
San Diego side, but getting someone like a Danielle Colaprico is a player that's gonna make an immediate impact on this roster. I think we're gonna see her week 1, get starts in the midfield, be that defensive lockdown player that Casey Stoney can really lean on, and there's still a lot of good depth in that midfield position, and I think Maggie Doherty Howard adds more to that depth. Even Rachel Hill, like you talked about her versatility, she could play in that midfield. But I think Colaprico is the biggest roster signing for San Diego because I think she'll make an immediate impact starting games in the first week, match day 1.
I think we're gonna chat about that a little bit next. I mean, maybe who could we see like as some players kind of be like those ideal starting 11 type of players for San Diego Wave during the regular season. We're gonna chat all about it and run down the roster. Stick with us. We'll be back after a quick break.
To the ones who said we couldn't, that our dreams were too big.
We had to think big, really change things.
We carry fire in our hearts. So don't doubt us. And don't stand in our way. We are your leaders, your allies, your sisters.
All voices belong.
And we are phenomenal.
Anything is possible.
Women Who Move Mountains. Explore the collection on Paramount Plus.
All right, let's chat about San Diego's roster ahead of this regular season kicking off on March 25th. There are some teams that still have to kind of narrow down those preseason rosters. It has to be under a certain number. And I think San Diego at this point is where they want to be. I don't know if we're gonna see any other movement or any other players waived or added on through waivers or anything like that because as of now we're maybe looking at around 25 to 26 players. Initially Telford, for example, was listed in their preseason roster, but she has announced her retirement. But the goalkeepers, we know Kaylin Sheridan's in the mix. We know Lauren Brixey out of the draft is in the mix as well. Let's take a look at maybe some of the forwards. Maybe we haven't talked about them enough. We've been talking about the midfielder a lot, but Amira Ali, Mackenzie Doniak has made a return, another player through free agency for them. Sophia Jakobsen, Alex Morgan, Jaden Shaw, Rachel Hill, and Melanie Barcenas, who was a U18 non-roster invitee. So might not see her. She might be one of those players that we might not see in the regular season. But some of the other midfielders that we didn't get to shine some light on. We haven't chatted too much about Belle Bridie, Taylor Korniak, Kelsey Turnbull, Emily Van Egmond, who was massive for them in
Yeah.
their inaugural season. We've mentioned Dory Howard, Colaprico, Enge, but Giovanna DeMarco also through the draft as well to kind of round out the midfielders and defenders. Abby Dahlkemper, Mia Gayu, and then Naomi Girma, Kristen McNabb, Madison Pogarch, Kaylee Reel, Shane Shorts, and Kristen Westfall. So we always love to talk about defenders, but I do want us to shine some light on the forwards a little bit because Lisa, we were chatting, or you mentioned the World Cup year, the international cycle. There's likely to be some players missing, but there's also some players who are going to want to try to utilize this time in the league to make sure that they are primed and ready to go for their World Cup. And I think when we're looking at these forwards, when we see somebody like a Jakobsen, we see somebody like an Alex Morgan, these are probably the players that might stand out the most to us, who we might see on opening day.
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of look especially at those forwards because there's a lot of depth there and there's a lot of international experience and there's a lot of what we saw last year from them. I mean, when you're running through this list of names, Sandra, for those that maybe didn't tune in so much last year to the NWSL season, there is the Rookie of the Year on this roster. There's Defender of the Year. Heads up, they're the same person in Naomi Girma. There's Goalkeeper of the Year in Caitlin Sheridan. There's a Golden Boot winner in Alex Morgan on this roster. There's also Young Female Player of the Year for U.S. Soccer in Jaden Shaw on this roster. Giant awards and accolades given to people on this roster. Casey Stoney, a candidate for Coach of the Year on this roster as well. There's just a lot of big names, and I think those big names and those big accolades and big awards come with big expectations for this type of team. But I think when you look at this forward front line, the consistency we saw last year between an Alex Morgan in that front line, a Sophia Jakobsen towards the end of the year, Amira Ali. I think that Ali was one of the players that had an incredible growth throughout 2022 that really solidified herself in the starting lineup and solidified what she could do for this side. And the continuity that we saw and the relationship between a Jakobsen, an Ali, and a Morgan developed throughout this year was fantastic. Mackenzie Doniak kind of solidified her role as that super sub that came off the bench and contributed and brought a spark to 60 minutes, 45 minutes of the game. I think that is where we could continue to see Doniak throughout this year. And when I look at the new additions of someone like a Rachel Hill, I think that would be similar to kind of the role we saw Katie Johnson in last year, where it was like a double super sub after Doniak came in around the 45-minute mark or the 60-minute mark. Then we see someone like a Rachel Hill come in around the 70-minute, 80-minute mark to kind of close out game and continue there. This is a lot of depth in the forward front line. I mean, Alex Morgan, right? You're a Golden Boot winner. We just talked about the FIFA 23 rankings. She's up there on them. It's top competition that you're playing with in that front line. I think that the defenders we also have to look at a little bit because Abby Dahlkemper, a center back that dealt with a lot of injury last year. She went through surgery. Now her development to come back and play in this year is going to be interesting to see how she can stay healthy. And that's really hard and that's really tricky to do. But we saw Naomi Girma come in, the number 1 draft pick in 2022 and not only solidified Rookie of the Year, but Defender of the Year. And she took over the leadership in that back line as soon as Abby Dahlkemper was out. And she played alongside someone like a Kaylee Reel in that center back position. And I really liked that duo. I really did, because Kaylee Reel was one that allowed a young Girma to shine and take on that leadership role. And I think that's why San Diego was able to be so good defensively. I mean, of course, and then you've got Caitlin Sheridan in goal, so that'll help you be really good defensively as well.
No, I'm with you. Listen, I think I tweeted something out the other day after attending Red Stars Media Day locally, and just sort of hearing things coming out of their media day, and they have a number of players who are working their way back into form, whether it's from injury or maternity leave. And we're talking about San Diego, and we're currently speaking about Abby Dahlkemper, and it's almost like believe in my tweet I said something along the lines of like, if you go across every team in the league, it's like you can almost pluck out some sort of comeback storyline for a player on almost any team in the league. And I'm with you in terms of, what was this offseason like for someone like in Abby Dahlkemper. She got shut down in the season and had to have what she referred to as like a very long and overdue surgery. So after she went through her process to sort of go through that and sort of write out her back and her neck and everything, and those are kind of like very scary, kind of tricky injuries to navigate. I just like I'm looking across the board at some of these players and how are they going to look in 2023 now that they've had some time to listen to their bodies, and give themselves the appropriate treatment, or take that significant time off or time away. So I think that's a player to look at. I think for San Diego Wave as they jump into their regular season. We saw Girma step up in ways that I don't think folks were really anticipating.
It was so cool.
I mean,
So cool
we
to watch
watched, we watched the arrival, of Naomi Girma, and stepped up in a multitude of ways for this San Diego Wave team, and because of her level of play, has been a constant feature in some of these national team camps, right? And is really in the conversation of a potential World Cup selection for that final roster. So when we're looking at the Wave, there's a number of players that may be absent that might open the window of opportunity for other players on the roster to get in. But I also think that also leaves the window of opportunity for those players who are in the process of building their minutes or trying to make that comeback to get those consistent minutes. So whether it's a Dahlkemper on the defensive side of things or it's like an Amira Ali in the attacking line. I'm excited to sort of see those pockets and windows of opportunity in the schedule for a team like San Diego Wave, just because of the minimal turnover that they had on their roster in the offseason. What is that next step going to look like for a number of players on this team, right? So when we're talking about players that we might want to see in the starting 11 or in the schedule during those windows of opportunity, we're also looking at like the roster and who is going to be the young prospect to have an impact for this team, and who is going to be like that experienced veteran that the team relies on a bit in light of a World Cup year, in light of potential absences during the middle of the season. So, of course, for young prospects, shocker, we're going with Jaden Shaw. We want to see more. We were. It's almost like we were just given a brief glimpse, right, at what Jaden Shaw could do for this team. Just needs very little, minimal time to get in and make an impact for the team in the attack. And listen, also brought the celebrations as well. I love those celebrations out of
the
Shaw.
surfboard. There's a little bit of surf in the Wave celebrations coming from Shaw. Yeah, how can this not be our young prospect to watch? It'll be her second year in the league, which gives her, I think, a leg up on maybe some of the other rookies, despite being very young. She won United States U.S. Soccer's Young Female Player of the Year award last year, and as you mentioned, did not take long for Shaw to get adjusted and get acclimated, not only with the NWSL, but with San Diego. In her first game, she gets onto the pitch and scores a goal pretty immediately. It was incredibly fun to watch, but now I want to see her take that next step. I think so often we put a lot of pressure on young players, whether they're the number one draft pick or they've been to a youth World Cups and they've had a lot of experience and kind of all the pomp and circumstance that comes around these young players. But when they perform as high as a player like Jaden Shaw did last year, we want to see them continue to grow and continue to become those incredible players that we know that they can be. And that's what I want to see from Shaw. Take that next step, have maybe a bit more of a consistent role in this roster and in Casey Stoney's squad, whether that's pushing her way into the starting lineup. I think we could see that at moments, especially when we kind of come into those World Cup weeks when there's a lot of players out, international windows that she sticks around for and she's still with the squad, maybe during the Challenge Cup. But I want to see growth from Shaw and a lot of consistency with her in the front line. And I think it would be fun to kind of see Shaw partnered up with an Alex Morgan, a Jakobsen, and see kind of how those sparks fly and the fireworks go off.
Yeah, I want to see the young prospect with some of those experienced veterans. I would like to even see her alongside someone like an Amira Ali, with when maybe that when like those Challenge Cup windows kind of come into play, and sort of see how they combine and connect and continue to develop chemistry with each other. But some of those experienced veterans, we're talking about a Jakobsen or a Morgan, are likely to be absent. Let's just say that they've got good possibilities of heading to a World Cup. But it's for those reasons that we're looking across this roster and trying to see who is that experienced veteran that this team might rely on in light of those moments. And we're actually going to go with Kaylee Real in this moment. We wanted to stick with a defender because, of course, that's what we do here at Attacking Third. But this is a player who had a really good season, I think, with San Diego Wave last year and during their inaugural run there. But this is also someone who has spent time in the league, knows what it is to try to keep things organized in the back. And I think when you're looking for some of that seasoned veteran experience, you might try to look at that back line just because of their vision and their whole perspective
Right.
of the pitch and how things go. In the lines in front of them. So
Yeah.
I would anticipate that somebody like Real is going to step up in light of leadership that might be absent in those World Cup stretches.
That expectation is very on par because we already saw Kaylee Real step up last year with the San Diego side. The starting center backs were Naomi Girma and Abby Dahlkemper. That was it. And those roles are very hard to shake up, barring any injuries that happen. Unfortunately, Abby Dahlkemper did deal with injury last year. We know she ended up getting surgery. And because of that, Kaylee Real stepped right into that center back role seamlessly, I'm also going to say. I think that we even saw, I mean, because Dahlkemper was dealing with injury, but also because Real did so well in that center back role. When Dahlkemper was coming back and there were moments when she got in there, it was almost like we preferred to see Real alongside Girma in that center back instead of Dahlkemper for a number of reasons. But I think when we look ahead to the World Cup year and how there are going to be a lot of absences, we'll talk about the international players, but six starting players going to be gone. One of them being your goalkeeper and your captain on this team. That's when it allows room for someone like a Kaylee Real to step up and step in. And I think that she really made that known last year to Casey Stoney that Real is a player that this team can lean on. And now as we enter this year and she continues to grow as a player, she's only 25 years old. Like she's still pretty young, but if she can already be that veteran and that leader on the pitch, that'll do wonders for Real's career and it'll do wonders for San Diego and the points that they can pick up during international windows.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in terms of an international spotlight, there's a possibility that, like many of the other clubs, San Diego is going to be without a handful of players because we're not just looking at the United States women's national team side of things. We're looking all across the board. There are a lot of players in this league who are World Cup bound and may likely miss a significant chunk of the season representing their respective nations. When we're looking at San Diego Wave, you got to start with one of their most important players in Kaylin Sheridan, who will likely be representing Canada in the World Cup. Sophia Jakobsen with Sweden is another attacking piece for them. And then there are also the potential for U.S. players. Alex Morgan, who has had extended time with national team camps, who has multiple World Cups at this point in her career. But Taylor Korniak is a young player who has spent time in national team camps and is still in the mix of Vlatko Andonovski's rosters leading up to the World Cup. And Naomi Girma has really bursted on to the scene in the program, really bullied her way into the conversation of and defender going to the World Cup. There's some hard decisions, I think, for Andonovski making that final roster. But we're talking anywhere from 4 to 6 players
Yeah.
who may be absent for this team. I mean, I think if you're the Wave and you say, well, maybe Korniak doesn't go. If you're following the Wave, you're like, that's a win for club.
Oh, that's a massive
You're
win.
you're like, yes, that's going to be great for us. But at the other side of things, if as excited as you are to see somebody excel and succeed, somebody like a Girma who might be absent, that's going to be a big hole for them.
Yeah, I think that's really what you have to look at. It's hard to sometimes separate your international feelings from your club feelings because, I mean, Caitlin Sheridan, like she doesn't have that many caps with Canada. She's only at 34, which is like it's still incredibly impressive. But as a top goalkeeper of the year contender and winner, that's a big loss for a San Diego side as well. But then I know you talked about the handful of Americans that could be attending the World Cup. You look at someone like an Alex Morgan, 204 international caps, 121 goals for the United States. And then there's a Naomi Girma who just got onto the national team in 2022. She got her first cap, and from there, she never looked back. 14 caps with the United States. And then someone like a Taylor Korniak, only 12 caps. But this is a player that has kind of become Vlatko Adanovsky, the United States women's national team head coach, go-to in that midfield. So I think when you're Casey Stoney or a San Diego fan, you have to look at this roster and think, where can we get depth from? And the fact that you're potentially losing some incredible attacking pieces in Jakobsen, Morgan, and Taylor Korniak, I'm throwing her into that mix. It's really good that they got depth in someone like a Rachel Hill, a Maggie Doherty Howard in the midfield, a Danielle Colaprico in the midfield. That's going to help them so much as they continue to move forward. They're going to lean on players like Amira Ali, Doniak, Jaden Shaw throughout those World Cup windows, because this is a lot. I mean, teams in the NWSL, they're losing a lot of players, but to be losing 5 or 6 of your starting players that aren't just starters, but like award winners from the previous year, it's a big loss. That's a big knock.
Yeah, we can't act like it's not. It is. And you know what? We've done the off-season overview. We've chatted about how they navigated that. We gave them a grade. Second year for Casey Stoney to build with this team. Some new additions, but really a lot of usual suspects at this point for San Diego. So what is the biggest burning question for this team as they head into the 2023 regular season? Is it just, can they get back to the playoffs, or can they get back and actually break through into the final?
I think it's a good question because the expectations last year for this team maybe weren't as accurate as they could have been, and the fact that San Diego blew those expectations out of the water by really finishing at the top of the table, hosting a first round playoff game, and then falling to Portland Thorns, who go on to win the NWSL championship. I think there was some disappointment from San Diego inside the locker room, right? They wanted to continue and move on and to win. Meanwhile, the fans, I think, were pretty happy with that result and how the season ended. They end up getting Snapdragon. They get a couple sold out games. But for you and I, we want to set the bar high. I want the San Diego team to get through to the final, breakthrough in their second year in existence. They've got a lot of the similar pieces they did last year. Now they can build on that. Casey Stoney already has a foundation down of what she wants from her team, how the system of play, how they're going to play throughout the year. I think it's not too much to ask to get them back to the final. If anything, at least to be hosting a playoff game, right?
I'm with you. I think the moves that they made in the offseason address those specific needs and address them in a way that's going to make them better. We talked very briefly about Emily Van Egmond, and she was someone who worked very hard in the midfield for this team. But this is also a player that might be absent for San Diego. Spending time with the Matildas in Australia. So I think the addition of Colaprico, I think, is going to give them an X factor, a bit of an X factor that I don't think people are actually prepared for. When we looked at that free agency list, we said from the jump, Dabinia is the prize, right? But I'm in the camp that San Diego got the absolute best defensive midfielder in the free agent market when they got
Mhm.
Colaprico. So this concept that is out there right now, like on the national team level, about like who's the six and like why can't we produce sixes and where's the six? They exist. Some of them are
Yeah.
actually playing in the NWSL. Colaprico is one of these players who has spent time with the national team. She's not necessarily in that picture anymore. I think because of some other things like injuries that she has had to navigate along the way. And we'll just if it quacks and looks like it, we'll just call it a duck. Colaprico doesn't fit people's
Yeah.
stereotypical profile of a defensive six.
Which
But
is crap,
it was
but
crap, right? Because she's like short, but it's like I've had the opportunity to watch Colaprico play live many times in many of her seasons with Chicago, and I have seen this player get hops on Sam Mewis, who's like 6 feet tall, and get called for the foul the other way. It was just funny. It's just funny moments, but I think they have enough pieces. They chose the right pieces to target, and I think Casey Stoney and what she's building for year two
yeah.
might have those key differences, and those key differences might be the thing that breaks them through. So I'm with you. I think in terms of a projected finish, they're gonna be a top four team. I think they're gonna host another playoff game.
Yep.
Who knows? Maybe it's gonna be a straight bye to the semifinal. And
That's
we're
I
this
think
close.
that's an expectation that San Diego wants, and that's an expectation that they have for themselves. I would not be surprised if they're a 1 or 2 seed at the end of the 2023 season. And you just talked about it. I think an X factor, yeah, Colaprico in the midfield for sure, but in the landscape of the NWSL, Casey Stoney is an X factor,
Yeah.
because she has just the way that she assembles a team and a roster, and the way that she can put pieces on the pitch. I mean, putting Korniak, who was formerly yes, a midfielder. She's played forward, she played in the back line, but coming out of Orlando, she was a frontline player, and dropping her back into the 10 role as the attacking center mid, underneath an Alex Morgan, was a game change for this San Diego squad, and that is what brought Taylor Korniak into the national team picture. And that was all had to do with Casey Stoney. Of course, the players are executing. I'm not taking anything away from Korniak. It's been so fun to watch that player throughout last year develop, get called into the national team, solidify her spot, change the structure of the national team for the United States and how they're playing. But it all stems back to Casey Stoney and what she's able to do. And I think expectations should be high for this team, because our projected finish is high for them. Make the playoffs, potentially host, potentially get a first round bye. Top 4 seed for me is San Diego.
Prove us right, San Diego, because we love to come back and chat about that when we get the chance. But that's a wrap for San Diego's preview. But we got a special 2 for 1 today. We're going to chat all about the Washington Spirit. So stick with us after a quick break.
Absolutely magisterial here. Artiglieria do Campeonato Brasileiro. Colpisce ancora. Golazo.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back into Attacking Third. I'm Sandra Herrera, lead NWSL writer for CBS Sports. Joined today, as always, by my colleague and co-host Lisa Roman, broadcaster and analyst for CBS Sports. On today's segment, we are chatting about Washington Spirit. We are doing a full team preview ahead of the regular season. So make sure you leave us a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform, because we're also on YouTube. You can subscribe to us at youtube.com/attacking third. Get all your exclusive NWSL content, previews, recaps right here on A3. The regular season begins on March 25th, and you can watch matches on Paramount Plus. And we're doing a preview for every single team, a podcast, and on YouTube, excuse me. This is our last team, okay? So if you have missed any of the previews, I promise you can go back and you can watch them on YouTube, or you can look through our podcast feed, okay? If you don't care about alphabetical order, that's fine. If you're only here for one specific team, hey, I love that too. I'm here for that energy.
We're all about that.
Check the channel, check the feed. Lisa, we're back. We got to talk about Washington Spirits, the last one, last team.
I promise we did them all. We talked about every single team, every player on every team. It was, it's been a joy, Sandra. It's been a nice progressive build up to the regular season. It's around the corner. We get to kick off with big games, big matchups to start the regular season. But this is our final team by team preview. Then we get to get into the nitty gritty of the matchups and things that happen, but we get to stay wide angle for now. Looking at the Washington Spirit. I mean, this is a team that's had some ups and downs. They've had some good times, some bad times. I think one of the good times to come is that they will be playing all their games at Audi Field.
Ayo.
No more Segra. Say adios to Segra. I think that's a good thing for fans, for players, for viewers, for broadcasters. Goodbye, Segra. It's a good thing. I think that's a good start for Washington Spirit for this 2023 season.
I'm with you. I think, again, we did these in alphabetical order, just to remind everyone, not in terms of like prediction and finishes and where we think they're going to land. So we're saving Washington Spirit because they are the W of the league. So let's maybe get into an overview for the team, just a quick refresher for everyone, in case you missed any moves or anything like that in the offseason. I think it really started with the technical staff side of things for this team in their offseason. We saw mid-season in 2022 with the Spirit, they had a coaching change. They terminated head coach Chris Ward. Later, through investigations, has been issued some conditions in terms of if he ever will come on back and coach in the league. Investigations found that he was the allegations of racial, essentially racial profiling were true, and they said can't work in the NWSL anymore pending certain conditions. And mid-season, they found themselves having to navigate a similar journey that they did in 2021. It's like they went through 2 consecutive seasons essentially, with a shakeup in coaching. For this team moving forward, they brought in Mark Kirkeren from Florida State University's club president to navigate the remainder of to help them navigate the remainder of the 2022 season, which was just a struggle for this team really from the get-go, making an appearance in the NWSL Challenge Cup final and then just having like a really just very heavy match loaded kind of schedule to start, and they just never found their footing. And then you add in the controversy with their coach and the very unfortunate incident that they had with a player, and you're just constantly like treading water, it sort of felt like, for this team.
It's a good way to put it, treading water. Yeah.
In terms of their off season, I think that's where they wanted to start, and we saw that reflected in the move. So they added pieces to their technical staff. I mean, Dawn Scott was a hire that we were really excited about. We were like, wow, they brought Dawn Scott back to the United States. She's in NWSL, going to help out with the Spirit and the technical and medical side of things. And they also hired Mark Parsons. They needed a new head coach, and they brought him back to the NWSL after he had a very brief stint with Netherlands women's national team. A little bit of a return, homecoming perhaps. He was initially with the Spirit in their inaugural season in 2023 through 2015, but then was with the Thorns from 2015 to 2021, won a bunch of titles during his time with the Thorns. But yeah, Moriano Imaizumi was also named as an assistant coach. Someone who has ties to Florida State University, had a brief stint with Chicago Red Stars, now with Washington Spirit. So they made these really notable changes across the technical staff. And it sort of set the stage, I think, for us that we wanted to see a little bit more continuity, but in the free agency pool or in the draft. And we just didn't really see that from this team in the offseason. We ended up giving them a B for the offseason grade because we were left with way more questions than we had answers for this team moving forward into the 2023 season. And they're coming off an 11th place finish, nearly last place with a 3-10-9 record. I believe they might have set a record for draws.
Yes.
In 2022, it was tough. And you look at, it's like this team almost, they didn't get last place because Gotham existed.
Yeah.
Like it
was it's the truth. And you talk about only 3 wins. That's pretty bad, going from a team that won the 2021 NWSL championship to then only getting 3 wins the next year. Yeah, they set a record for most consecutive ties, I believe it was, or most ties with 10. And that's like probably one of the worst records you could set, and the worst one being the one that Gotham set, most consecutive losses. And Gotham was last place in the league last year, and the only reason Washington wasn't there is because Gotham was there. That's exactly it. This was a bad season for Washington last year. They struggled a lot. They had a lot of off-field things that were happening, which we saw that happen in 2021 as well with their ownership and everything that was going on there. But the fact that they could turn it around in 2021 and then in 2022, they really couldn't catch a break. As you said, at best, treading water, this team was. They couldn't catch a break again. And this time, I think the players were just a little bit too exhausted to translate that onto the pitch. And they couldn't get it together. I think getting Don Scott, pretty great. I think getting Mark Parsons back, interesting. I'm going to see how Parsons does this year. I think what he did at Portland was impressive, of course, establishing a culture, a winning culture. I think he has pretty good ability to develop young players. That's one big positive I will give him and this Washington Spirit side as we go through the roster. But other than that, I think it's going to be hard for Washington to come back from their D grade that we gave them, because they really didn't make too many changes in the offseason, and they lost a lot. And after a team that only gets 3 wins in 2022, you need to make some changes. You do.
After the season that they had in 2022 and the fact that they're approaching a World Cup year where they're another team that might miss a significant amount of players, yes, they needed to do something, right? And I think they did. I think they did. Yes. Did they add players? Yeah, they did. We're going to talk about that. They utilized the draft to really kind of flesh out the roster, but they also lost a pretty key piece in light of that. In terms of like actual breakout signings for this team, maybe in a similar boat as some other teams, not as big a splash in the free agency period. They did do some re-signings, right? They brought Barnhart back, they brought Amber Brooks back, kind of simple re-signings.
Yeah.
Players that have been with the team, hey, we want to retain you and we need you moving forward. So that was smart. The headliner was probably the announcement of Chloe Ricketts, a midfielder, the youngest player to ever sign an NWSL contract. So that's maybe the headline stealer there in terms of off-season signings. Perhaps we look at Inez Warena, just under that, a veteran in France, formerly played with Olympique Lyon. And so this is someone who can perhaps bring a different level of professionalism for what's going to be a very young team, because this Washington Spirit side navigated their draft the way they needed to navigate it. They needed to add bodies to this roster.
Depth.
They needed it. And they walked out of that draft with several players, and they signed 6 first-year players out of the draft. But they also lost some things within that draft. Emily Sonnet was part of a trade with OL Reign to get more picks in this draft. They lost players through free agency. They do not have Kelly O'Hara anymore, signed with Gotham. And there's things like injuries, unfortunately. Those things happen in preseason. We've seen it year in, year out. We hate to see it, but it's a thing that happens. And they recently announced that Anna Helferty is going to be out with a season-ending injury. So maybe those 3 detrimental losses for this team moving forward in 2023.
They're big. They're massive losses. Despite, we have listed on our rundown 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in addition to the 6. So 11 players that Washington Spirit added to their roster. None of those, I'm going to be honest, are going to change the game. They're not going to come in and just completely flip the script for Washington Spirit. Meanwhile, the players that they lost, Kelly O'Hara, that's a massive hole in your back line. Massive. Emily Sonnet, massive hole in your back line. These are 2 women's national team caliber players, starting women national team defenders. They were on your team when you won the championship. They're veterans, they're leaders, massive. And then you also lose someone like an Anna Helferty, who has, I think, the experience of those other two players because she's been in the league for a number of years. She's played a variety of positions as well in this league, and she was such a consistent factor. She was also one of the most athletic players I think I've ever watched play. She's just constantly running up and down the pitch as a wingback player, contributing to goal scoring opportunities and crosses, and then also being a good defender. Those losses are way bigger than the 13 players that they signed this year. I think it's like adding a Band-Aid to a bullet hole on this team. And that's part of the reason that they got a D from our grading. I think when you look at the signings that Washington Spirit made, there are definitely some positives amongst this group in terms of adding depth, adding a Chloe Ricketts, but I don't think a Chloe Ricketts is going to make that much of an impact this year. At 15 years old, it's hard to come into a league and score all the goals and take a team from second to last place to the top of the standings. It's not going to happen. So I like the signing for Chloe Ricketts. I like that it's available and it's an option for younger than 18 players.
We also need to just look at who her coach is going to be. Mark Parsons is not a stranger to having young players on the team.
No.
He was the coach with the Thorns when Olivia Moultrie made the headlines as the then youngest player of all time to sign a contract and was not interested in piling too much on to a young player.
Yeah.
But that was also a pretty stacked roster. So, wanted to bring this player along slowly. This was not someone who was cracking week to week to week to week starting 11s for the Thorns. Was a player that was utilized off the bench. And I'm looking at Parsons with the Spirit, and there are a lot of young players that they're gonna roll with in 2023, but that includes Ricketts, but it also includes these multiple draftees that they just signed in.
There's 6 draftees that they signed, and what was their first pick? How late did it come? Were it like 30th something, 25th pick?
Like top pick in the third round. All of the picks were later round picks. I think they're
right,
first in the third round.
Which there are definitely diamonds in the NWSL draft that end up falling to the second and third round. But to sign all 6 first-year players out of the draft that you have is it's depth. It's depth for these players and for this team. I think Inez Warrena out of France and formerly with Olympique Lyon, that's going to be a big veteran for this team. But also she's coming from into the NWSL. I mean, that's a shift. That's a change. I think a little bit of consistency with midfielder Marissa Shiva is going to help. This is a player that's been in and out of this roster for a number of years, and she ends up getting a contract in August of last year, re-signing that contract. That'll add depth to the midfield as well. But the losses are just bigger than the gains for this Washington side, and that's why we didn't give them a higher offseason score, and that's why I'm still concerned for this Washington Spirit team heading into 2023.
The defense is going to be
scary.
It's going to be an issue. I think they might have to
be a little Swiss cheese.
Sam Staub is a very valuable asset, I think, on that back line right now, and I think the club is also thankful that they were able to negotiate a new contract for someone like an Amber Brooks,
massive
out of free agency. Because I think there's a certain number of players that they're going to really have to rely on when it comes to their defensive shape. I think moving forward into the regular season, no Sonnet, no Herrera. I mean, we didn't mention the fact that Karina Rodriguez is with Club America. She was a defensive piece at times for them as well. So
big depth piece. We saw a lot of Rodriguez when the internationals were gone, and we'll talk about it. But Washington has a lot of internationals that head out during the FIFA windows, and Rodriguez was one of those depth pieces last year for them. But the only reason, I don't want to be preaching to the choir, but the only reason that you have depth players on a team is to get them experience, albeit limited experience throughout the year, but that way you can build upon them next year. And losing someone like a Rodriguez hurts this team because no, she wasn't a starting caliber player and she didn't contribute the most minutes last year, but she contributed minutes and she was with that team through the lows. So then when you put her on and you play her alongside people in the midfield like a Sanchez and an Andy Sullivan, it gains that player's experience. And that's what this team has lost.
And when we're talking about depth, that depth was something that this team needed to have going into 2023. That just looms larger when you look at a player like Rodriguez, who's now gone to a different league entirely. This was a player that was drafted, one of those draft picks was maybe going to get some time, but had very limited minutes, and unfortunately, wanted to get more playing time, and is now in another league. So we'll
for her.
They've got a roster. They've got a roster of players, and we got to talk about it. We're going to go through some things positionally, maybe identify some players that we might see on opening weekend. Stick with us. We're going to break down the roster after a quick break.
Welcome to the UEFA Europa League on Paramount Plus.
What a night!
Your home for more ultra-competitive, world-class soccer. Where Europe's elite and soccer's Cinderellas pump out that one-of-a-kind white-knuckle excitement that grows with every cut, every cross, and each and every... The UEFA Europa League. Stream every match live exclusively on Paramount Plus.
All right, let's take a look at the whole roster for the Washington Spirit ahead of the
whole roster, HOLE or WHOLE.
The roster ahead of 2023. Let's talk about some players across positional lines and maybe pluck some out that we might see in an ideal starting 11 for Mark Parsons. Goalkeepers: Nicole Barnhart, player that they re-signed in free agency; Albert Kingsbury, Liza Bosselman to round out the three goalkeepers. Defenders: Dorian Bailey, Cameron Biegalski, Amber Brooks, Gabrielle Carlisle, Maddie Owell, and Helferty listed with a season-ending injury. Tara McCown, Sam Staub, Delaney Graham, Jordan Thompson. Midfielders listed as Jordan Baggett, Nicole Douglas, Bailey Feist, Tori Huster, Inés Guarena, Paige Medier, Chloe Ricketts, Ashley Sanchez, Marissa Sheva, Andy Sullivan, Riley Tanner, to round that out at 11. And 6 forward listed with Ashley Hatch, Savannah Coleman, Lena Solano, Trinity Rodman, Melina Rembimas, a U18 non-roster invitee, and Mariana Speckmeyer, at the time a non-roster invitee as well. So when we're looking at the goalkeepers, the defenders, the midfielders, forwards, I think the big names, that stand out are players that have been with this team for some time, whether it's a Kingsbury and net for this team, or defensively a Sam Staub, or in the midfield, maybe we're going to see a bounce back year from somebody like Tori Huster.
Yeah, that would be great.
Obviously we're looking at somebody like Andy Sullivan in a World Cup year for this team. Trinity Rodman, Ashley Hatch, all players that you can look and say, hey, these are players that you can plug in, game day ready, ideal starting 11 type players. But who else kind of slots in around them? And who do we see if some of these players that we mentioned already go absent in a World Cup year?
Yeah, I think that you gave a shout to Tori Huster in the midfield. If the Spirit could get back a player like Huster, massive. This is a player that had season-ending injury, her Achilles. She went out at the end of 2021. It's been a very long, treacherous road to recovery for Tori Huster. But she's a veteran. She's a leader. She's a player that solidifies in the midfield alongside someone like an Andy Sullivan and can really fill holes when we're looking at World Cup months and weeks that are happening with international windows. But I think we have to look defensively, because that's where the biggest losses are for this team, and Sonnet and Kelly O'Hara, because they've got Aubrey Kingsbury, who has been a consistent factor between the sticks for the Spirit side and in goal. I think re-signing someone like Nicole Barnhart, Barney's she's the
Barney.
She's the best. Like, she's the biggest veteran in this league, essentially. And the fact that she still wants to be involved and she still wants to be on a team, I think that the team needs to lean on her for a little bit of leadership this year and camaraderie in the training room. But Kingsbury, she'll be the solidifier in between the posts for goal. But across the back line, you're exactly right. Sam Staub is going to have to step up big this year. And Amber Brooks, it's good that they were able to re-sign her as a free agent. But I think there's a lot of question marks about who else is going to fill that role. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a Cam Bigalski in that outside back role, but this is one that didn't have a lot of consistency in that role last year, and perhaps because there was a Sonnet and an O'Hara filling that space. Dorian Bailey, we traditionally saw Bailey play higher in the midfield previously. Now, again, this is a different coach in Mark Parsons, and sometimes a coach can come in and just shake things up a bunch. And personally, I think Washington needs that. I do. I think that if we see Bailey along the back line, Tara McKeown, she's played a lot higher for this team as well. So that's something that I'm a little surprised to see. And the loss of Anna Helferty is big. But I mean, attacking wise, they've got their traditional pieces that have been with them, right? You look at the front four in an Ashley Sanchez and Ashley Hatch, Trinity Rodman, and Anna Helferty is a loss up there, but you've got a Tara McKeown that can slot in and play up there. I think those are going to be important pieces for this Washington Spirit side.
You know, I just like, we're going through the names on this roster, and you know, we're looking at players you could plug in maybe in an ideal starting 11 come, you know, match week 1, right? And the World Cup is still some months away, so yes, we're likely going to see some of these bigger names that we've tossed out there. These and a lot of these players were part of that 2021 NWSL championship winning team. So are there good pieces on this roster? Yeah, of course. But that's literally something you could say about all 12 clubs in this league. That's not like a profound statement to make about the Washington Spirit. It's like, oh, there's talent on this team. Like, yes, of course. We also said that about Gotham last year, and they still finished where they finished. So I'm just curious in terms of like specific players who can have an impact or will be relied upon in light of a World Cup year. Because again, we've also been talking about players who might go missing for their team in long extended periods of times. So we're looking for young prospects to make an impact for their teams, and we're also looking at the experienced veteran piece that the team is likely to rely upon. And we mentioned Chloe Ricketts, that was perhaps one of the headliner type of offseason moves for this team. But I don't know if this is the player that Mark Parsons is going to say, you're going to be the one to be our young prospect and lead us in those exciting moments, right? Maybe we're looking more at these draft picks because they signed 6 players to contracts. Maybe we're looking at somebody like a Nicole Douglas, who was essentially their first pick in the draft out of Arizona State University. And maybe we're going to see some off the bench energy, like be a game changer. Had a good collegiate career.
I know. I don't think it's a bad pick by any means. This is an inexperienced roster, I'm going to say, with not a lot of players that have played together or that have played a long time in the league. And that's something that this team is going to struggle with. I just don't think we'll see enough of Chloe Ricketts this year. We know how Mark Parsons like to ease players into the league, especially being so young. I honestly, I think Nicole Douglas is a pretty good shout as a draft pick because this team signed all 6 draft picks that they had. That's a lot of youth. They're going to need to be utilized. And if given the opportunity, a Douglas, she could get time and get minutes, especially now that we know Anna Helferty is season-ending injury. She's SEI and she's out. Douglas plays across that front line. She can score goals. She's got a bit of versatility in the ability to do that, whether it's off the dribble, off crosses. She's got a pretty good aerial presence as well in Douglas. And if given the moment, Douglas needs to step up. She needs to be one of those players that can kind of come in and be a game changer. If anything, just bring energy and to spark off this bench. It's going to be hard to break into that front line, right? Like you're competing against Trinity Rodman, against Ashley Hatch, but there are still some places for players to get in and to find spots in that front line. And if Douglas can do that, it would be really good for Washington. It would be really good for them if some of their younger players, draft picks, can make an impact on this team.
No, it sort of mirrors, I think, a little bit what we saw, from Chicago last year. We knew that they were going to have a lot of young pieces, and what were those young pieces going to provide? So I think if you're asking, um, your young players to very quickly learn to become pros, that's one thing, but I think you've also got to give them, those examples, of what it means to be a pro. We hear all the time about how difficult that transition is from playing collegiately to playing pros, can be for some players. Um, but I think when you're looking at this roster, you're also looking at, okay, well, who are they going to lean on? Where are they going to try to learn the ropes from, or who's going to show them the way of like professionalism, like within the league? So we were thinking about like who's going to be that player that this team is going to rely upon in terms of like the experienced veteran, and we're going to go with a goalkeeper. We're going to go with Aubrey Kingsbury, in this role for the team, because this is someone who has been the starting goalkeeper for the Spirit for quite some time. We've had Kingsbury on the show before. Always has spoken from a place of leadership, like with this team, whether it's been, whether the armband has been given to her or not. But has always sort of been one of those players. And I just think with the World Cup approaching as quickly as it is, and we're going to talk about players who might go missing for the Spirit. Kingsbury is one of those players who was initially receiving call-ups with the national team, but hasn't had one in quite some time. So I think we're more in the camp that she is likely to be a figure for this Washington Spirit side more consistently throughout this 2023 and this World Cup cycle. And we think she is going to be that presence both on the pitch and in the locker room that the team looks to and went ahead and, kind of rely upon her.
Yeah, I think she is going to be that player that needs to step up as a vocal leader and as a locker room leader, and then of course on the pitch. But I think a Kingsbury is one that can do that. She's got a couple years of experience. She's been with this team through a lot of their ups, a lot of their downs. But can she bring them together, unite them in this 2023 year, especially when there is a lot of ins and outs of international windows? And this is a player that also has been on the other side of the call-ups, getting called into the United States women's national team, and most recently has kind of been weaned out of that role and hasn't been called in a lot. So she knows what it's like to leave your team to go play internationally and then to come back and kind of be able to pick things back up. So she, I think as a veteran, can be able to bridge that gap for some of those younger players that are doing that, like a Sanchez, a Rodman, Hatch, Sullivan, that when they're gone, can Kingsbury keep the team together, be the glue that holds everything in place, pick up points? But I guess they did that last year with their 10 ties, but pick up points and pick up wins. It's a lot of it's going to fall on Kingsbury's shoulders, but I think she's up to the challenge. I really do.
No, I'm with you. She's a player that I've enjoyed speaking with before in the past, whether it's been in media availabilities or here on the show. And I just think that's going to be the player that they probably rely heavily upon. I think it's for teams like the Spirit, it's going to often be a defensive type of player. So whether it's a goalkeeper or somebody like an Amber Brooks, who has a lot of experience in the league at this point in her career, and even Andy Sullivan, right, during her time with the team. Even though we believe that Andy Sullivan is one of those players going to the World Cup, so they have a few of them. Washington Spirit just like every other club in the league, is likely to miss some players during the World Cup. And it's not just at the United States level. There's a number of players. But in terms of the United States, we're looking at Andy Sullivan as a possibility, Trinity Rodman, Ashley Sanchez, Ashley Hatch. These are all players who have been called into national team camps under head coach Vlatko Andonovski for quite some time. But we're also looking at Gabrielle Carl for Canada, Marissa Sheva for Ireland. So again, anywhere from 4 to 6 players who could be gone for this Washington Spirit side. I mean, that's a huge chunk of players. I mean, at this point, when you're even just looking at the U.S. side of things, that's 4 of your possible starters.
Yeah. It's a lot. I mean, now it's less than it was in previous years because the roster has foregone with Kelly O'Hara and Emily Sonnet, but still that's a lot of players and starting caliber players that could be gone for a very big chunk of it. I think when we look at the biggest kind of spotlight on those players, and Andy Sullivan, a Rodman, and a Sanchez are the ones that shine the brightest to me as to what they've been able to do at the international level with the United States women's national team. And maybe it'll also help them, right? I mean, it's very tiring to go and leave your club team and play for country, specifically in the World Cup. It's a lot of minutes, it's a lot of travel on the body, but sometimes it gives those players that national team rub. And we've seen that happen with a Rodman, with a Sanchez. They've kind of stepped up their game a little bit. And now as they're getting into their junior season, their third year in the NWSL, can they be able to translate that back to their club when they return and not just deflate because they're not surrounded by Alex Morgan anymore or Mallory Swanson setting them up for these great opportunities? But can they kind of channel that national team energy, that championship mindset that they have when they play with the national team and bring it back to their club, elevate the status of all the players around them and be those catalysts to do that? I'm leaning on someone like a Rodman and a Sanchez because we haven't really seen it from Sullivan. It's hard for Sullivan to be a leader on her own. She's much better when she's doing that alongside someone. She's more of a silent leader. When she speaks up, everyone's listening to her. But can a Rodman and a Sanchez be those players to kind of kickstart everything with this team now that they're not the young ones and the new ones anymore?
Yeah, no, I mean it's an interesting point. I mean, I listen. I remember Rodman in her rookie year, like referring to somebody as Sullivan as like that that pro on the team that she looked to as an example. Whether it
Mhm.
was on the pitch or off of it. But this is a player. These are 2 players who are likely to be absent. In a World Cup year, where is the team going to reach for that during those stretches of time? And I mean, look, Gabrielle Carl, we're already talking about the defensive line and holes we might see. And they made this signing to try to plug some of that up. And this is a player that might be gone during the World Cup. Marissa Shep for Ireland. I mean, we didn't even mention Briley Tanner for Panama. And
I know.
she's just coming off of a great international window with Panama. I mean, my God, they clinched
Just
a final
qualified,
spot in the
yeah.
World Cup, and she scored. So I mean, like when you're looking at a season in front of you that has so many new parts to it, whether it's in the technical staff side of things or even on the roster, a World Cup year just adds to even more possible disjointedness within the schedule. So when we're looking at the Spirit and we're looking at the season approaching, what's the biggest burning question around this team? Because the reality is, yes, they do have talent on this team. They've got good players on this team, just like all 12 clubs in the league. And they are 2 years removed from an NWSL championship final. That was an incredibly unique set of circumstances that they had to unfortunately compartmentalize and go through. We heard all along through players when we were chatting with them through
Mhm.
that 2021 season, the difficulties of that.
Yeah.
And playing for each other and getting to that moment in time was kind of part of what helped get them through it. But if you're 2 years removed from that, you've got a new head coach, you've got new technical staff, and you've got half of a roster that's nearly new as well. Is the burning question around this team that they have something to prove. Was 2021 a fluke year for this team? And can they get back to the postseason in a first year under Mark Parsons?
I think it's such a good question because the history of this team, I mean, they won it. They won the championship in 2021. At the start of the 2022 season, their roster had the least amount of changes of anyone in the league, and they finished 11th. They couldn't turn it on. It's almost like 2021 was fight or flight response for this Washington Spirit team with all the turmoil that was happening off the pitch in the front office with the ownership all over the papers and in the media and headlines. These players really turned inward and took what they could do on the pitch and took it to the championship and raised the trophy at the end of it. I think that this year will be better than last year. I do for this team. I think that because of the changes they made, getting a new head coach in there that wasn't part of any of the ownership battles that happened. I think despite it being Mark Parsons or not, it's more of the newness of having a new coach in there. And Angela Salem, who's a former Thorns player, is on the technical staff. She's an assistant coach working with Mark Parsons. I think that Salem has helped this team. And what they've been able to do in the communication between players and coaching staff. But I think that it's going to be a lot for this team to prove that 2021 wasn't a fluke and that they deserved that championship and that they fought for every single one of those wins. But was it just something that kind of came to them because of everything that was happening on the pitch and they came together on the pitch? I don't know. I think that this year will be better than last year. I think this team will take steps forward. But also, I think that Gotham was a little bit of the safety net for Washington last year because Gotham was just worse than them. Yeah. And I think Gotham has taken steps forward. So it's going to be hard. The projected finish for my Washington Spirit this year in 2023 it's going to be a struggle for them to turn it around. I think they will take strides to move forward because they've got good pieces, but every team has good pieces. I don't think they'll make the playoffs. I still think they'll be outside of that playoff window, a 7-8 to 11, honestly.
7 to 11. It's a wide
range. It's a wide range, but they're not in playoff. I don't think they'll be in playoff contention. I'll put it that way.
But I'm with you on that. I just look. I think there are people who are bullish on the Spirit, and they should be again because there's good individual pieces. But everything I think that we've seen and heard from this franchise in the offseason, specifically from Parsons. The need to navigate a World Cup year, to have a roster fleshed out with younger players. There's all things here within these quotes or these scrums that you receive or you hear, and it just sort of feels like they too are trying to maybe tamper some sort of push back some like very, very high expectations. Every single professional team wants to go out there and win and compete and do well and win titles. But they also are in a bit of a retooling year. I don't know if they are a franchise that is calling it a full-on rebuild, but it's even with these pieces that they have, the star players like a Rodman or a Sanchez or a Sullivan, even with that trio of players, that there's still a little bit of a rebuild around, even if it is just around those players. And typically that doesn't always translate into, a very long or extended postseason push. Though I am enthusiastic and excited to see where these chips will fall and where they will lie for this team moving forward. So love to come back and be proven wrong. We love that so much on Attacking Third. So we'll see if we're talking about the Spirit in a different lens. And we're just going to kick back and get ready for the start of the regular season, because that's a wrap on team by team previews. We've got all 12 done. Go back, check the YouTube channel, go back, check your podcast stream, and find the team that you want a quick preview on or recap of, because we did all 12 for you. It's been a blast. We cannot wait for the regular season to kick off. It's going to be on March 25th. and you could watch games on Paramount Plus. Thank you, everyone, for listening to Attacking Third. Download, follow, listen to us anywhere you get your podcast. Fill out those March Madness brackets. You still got like 10 minutes. Make sure you watch us. We're on YouTube. Subscribe to us at youtube.com/Attacking Third, and we will be back with more NWSL content for you all as the 2023 season kicks off. For Sandra Herrera and Lisa Roman, this was Attacking Third.